All right, folks, in this video, we have got fish, rabbits, hypothermia, grizzly bears, and a whole lot more. Let's talk about episode 7, season 8 of Alone. So let's get started with Biko. The fact that he's building a fireplace, in my mind anyway, makes me think that he's definitely thinking about the long game. It's interesting that he found some clay on his site. I looked all over my site and wasn't able to find any kind of clay. Just had some kind of sandy mud to work with, which doesn't work very well for any kind of mortar or fireplace construction or anything like that. So him having that clay is going to be a huge benefit for that fireplace. I did notice that on his cabin, the gable ends there are open. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does to try and remedy that as the season goes on and things get colder. You know, that's just, the fireplace is great, but with those open gable ends, that's, you know, that allows the wind to come in and basically rob any kind of heat that you generate from the fireplace. So I'll be interested to see how he addresses those hopefully in the future. All right, so we'll move to Colter, who right off the bat has just a really nice haul of mushrooms. And from what he was saying there, he's finding both bolete and pine mushrooms. And I really like the way he's slicing those things up and stringing them on his snare wire and then hanging them from the roof of his shelter so that they can dry out. You know, mushrooms need to be dried. Like he said, you can't just store them in a hole because they'll get all mushy. They'll soak up moisture from the ground and basically just rot. And so the only way to preserve those long term is to do that, to cut them up and then dry them, which he's doing. Now, one of the things that I really like about Colter's shelter is how he incorporated that big boulder into it. That is a great way. You know, if you can use a big rock face or a boulder or something like that as part of your shelter, build your fire right up beside that thing, that's just going to act as a big heat sink, which basically stores that energy from the fire, stores that heat from the fire, and reflects that back out at night even after your fire goes out. So that was a very good use of that. And then we also see him really beefing up the insulation on the roof and then also the front of his shelter. It looks like he's got it pretty well sealed up now. So that's going to be a huge benefit, you know, as the season goes on and things start to get colder. It also looks like Colter is starting to get the fishing figured out. You know, he takes his boat out in this episode, catches a couple of fish. Now, the fish that he's catching are small, but if he can catch small fish, he can catch bigger fish. There are definitely bigger fish out there. And as we'll see later in the episode, he's doing a lot better than I was fishing that time of year, and I think he's probably doing better than anybody else. It's going to be very interesting to see what kind of advantage that boat gives him as the season goes on. All right, so we see a lot more of Rose in this episode, and I'm really glad about that. Rose is a super nice person, just a great woman, and she actually has quite a bit, like a lot of trapping experience, and we get to see some of that in this episode. We get to see her putting out snares and really kind of getting out and trying to take advantage of some of the resources that are on her place. That's one of the big questions that people are asking is like, why are we not seeing people putting out snares? And this is, I can tell you why you're not seeing it from me, and I suspect why you're not seeing a lot from other people. But the big reason that I didn't just go all out on snares to start with was that, first of all, the rabbit population or the hare population in that area, at least on my site, there wasn't a lot of hares. And without snow, when the hare population is low, it makes finding their paths where you'd want to set those snares, it makes finding those things very difficult. And so I think Rose was setting out snares where she could see a little bit of sign or places where rabbits would have been going. And good for her, because she eventually does catch a rabbit. I'm gonna talk about that here in just a minute. And so on one of Rose's outings, she finds this just an amazing find, a huge bear trap. I mean, I don't know if they let her keep that or not and take that home, but that's like a once in a lifetime find right there. That thing is cool. And then Rose has a pretty serious bear encounter. Now, seeing a bear out there is one thing, but having a bear like that shows no fear and doesn't want to leave, that's a different situation. And she's, you can see in there that it shakes her up pretty good, but she stays, I mean, she does get a little bit emotional about it, and that is completely understandable. I think anybody in that situation would, but she doesn't panic. She keeps it together. She doesn't panic and tap out. And that just goes to show you how strong Rose is. And so she finally does catch that snowshoe, and it's obvious, like that's an emotional thing. And unless you've ever been through something like that, it's very difficult to understand what something like that could mean to you. And even, when Colter catches those couple of fish, it's impossible, unless you've ever been in a situation like that, it's impossible to understand how much those little successes and those little wins can mean. All right, so we'll move on to Theresa, and first off, she's going out foraging and she gets turned around. She gets a little bit mixed up on her directions, and it's in that type of situation. So you've got dense timber, you've got overcast where you can't see the sun, and you've got rolling topography. You've got weather moving in, it's probably getting late in the day, and you don't know which direction to go to get back to your shelter, to get back home. It's very easy to panic in that type of situation. But Theresa, I'm sure she has experience navigating like that. She doesn't panic. She gets a little bit emotional, but that's completely understandable. But she doesn't panic. She gets it figured out and eventually gets back home. So the next thing that we see of Theresa is her setting out a trot line. Now, I thought the system that she had, where she put out the clothesline system, was absolutely brilliant. I think that's the first time that we've seen that on the series. So she's got 2 anchor points on shore, and then she's swimming another one out to where she has a ring out there anchored. And so she can put her hooks on one side, pull this side to take it out, pull the other side to bring it in. And so she's able to get those set hooks way out offshore where she needs to have them to have any chance at all at catching fish. This late in the year, when it's getting cold, she takes a big risk in doing that. And I think she understands. She understands the risk that she's taking. But when you're faced with either starvation or taking a risk, sometimes you have to take those risks in order to make something happen. Now, as you can see on the episode, there's some things that happened that didn't quite go as planned. She didn't know that her life vest was going to like auto inflate, and so when that happened, it caused some issues with her. She got some things tangled up out there. Luckily, she got everything taken care of, and she was able to get her anchor and her line out, but she was in the water for quite a bit longer than she had expected to be out there. Now, before she went out, she was thinking ahead. She did start a fire. She had something ready to go when she came out of the water. So she knew that she was going to be cold, and so she had that fire going. She was able to get back, get warmed up, eventually, I think, get into her sleeping bag and bring her core temperature back up. That was a very real situation for Theresa. I'm glad everything worked out. She got her line out, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works as the year goes on. We're going to see if that risk is rewarded. All right, and so finally I can talk about some of the things that I did. Right off the bat, I'm working on a deer decoy hat. Now, I got this idea from an account that I read of Ishi. Came out of the wilderness in 1920 something. But he was living on his own, and if you've not read about that, it's a very, very tragic, but then also super interesting account of his life. Ishi in Two Worlds is a great book to read. But anyway, that was one of his hunting tactics. He would make a deer head, put it on top of his head, and he would get in the bushes and just kind of poke his head up and move it around and bring deer into him. I was mainly doing this just as a way to kill time and keep myself occupied. And I took that deer head and hung it up there beside my fireplace after I got finished with it. So then I start working on brain tanning the deer hide. Now, brain tanning is something that I've done quite a bit of. I actually did a lot of it when I was in college in Mississippi and made a whole outfit, pants, shirt, everything out of the deer that I'd killed with my self bow. And so I've done quite a bit of it. They show me like working the brains into the hide and stretching the hide and things like that. But before that, I had to flesh the hide, and I had to take the hair off and the outer layer of the skin, which is called grain. And I did all that with the back of my saw blade. Now I'll probably, if you guys are interested, and I'll probably do a video on brain tanning, you know, sometime later this fall or winter after I get a deer hide. But I had to make the decision on how to use this brain. Do I eat it, or do I use it for brain tanning the hide? I wanted to use the brain to brain tan the hide so that I could have that hide for working on projects when the days got short. I knew that I would need things to keep myself occupied, and I saw that hide as materials for future projects, and so I wanted to brain tan that thing. And so I started, you know, I took the brains out, I worked it into a paste, I worked that into the hide really well, and then I started stretching the hide, and that's where this episode leaves off. So then you see that I start having some encounters with bears around camp. Now, it took me several days to get all of my meat smoked and cured out, and during that time it was all in the smoker. And so when I built that smoker, and I said this in the last episode, I knew that I couldn't stop a bear. If a bear wants to get into that thing, they're going to be able to do it, but it's going to take them a little while too. And so those, you know, while all of my meat was in that smoker, those were very anxious times for me. I didn't sleep very well. Because I was worried about that. I was worried about a bear getting into that. And so after that first night, I went ahead and just rigged up like a tripwire alarm system. And again, if you guys are interested in seeing that in more detail, I can do a video on how I set that thing up. It was pretty simple, but it actually worked. So we also see that I am rationing food. I do not want to run out of food, and 50 pounds of deer meat might sound like a lot, but when you consider that you're eating just deer meat and maybe a little bit of mushrooms and other things, it really will go fast if you don't ration it out. I'm actually what I'm planning on doing this fall is I want to experiment with that. I've never tried that to see exactly how long a deer would last, but later this fall, I think Nate Weber's going to do it as well. I want to shoot a deer and just go straight carnivore and see just how long a single deer like that would last. And I'm thinking that it is probably not going to last that long. So with that deer, I think, and we'll see this fall if I can pull this together and actually do this experiment, I bet if I eat nothing but deer meat, I bet I could eat 50 pounds of meat within 3 weeks. And so rationing food in that type of situation when I was out there is absolutely necessary. You can't just go off eating as much as you want. And so I rationed that meat out for a pretty long way into the future because I did not want to run out of meat again. And so I had a very limited amount of deer meat that I could eat every day. And so I was still fishing quite a lot and just having zero success with it. I think I said it in there, you know, just day after day after day, you're standing out there on those rocks. It's cold, the wind's blowing, and you're just not catching anything. Not only not catching anything, but just not getting any bites. That is discouraging. And so before I went out there, I really had considered taking a tarp. I actually took a tarp with me to BC and just decided once I was there to swap it out for something else and not take it. And so I'd planned on building a boat or a kayak, kind of similar to what Colter's built, but a little bit different. Again, it's going to be real interesting to see how Colter does with that boat later on. I have a feeling he's going to do pretty well once day 45 comes around and he can start setting his gill net out in that deeper water. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this video. Again, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that. Click the bell icon. You get notified when the next video goes up. And we will see you next Thursday before episode 8 of season 8 of Alone. We'll see you next time.